What's up, devs? Hope you're doing well. In this hackalong, we are going to be rebuilding this Vercel main header section from scratch. We're going to be using Tailwind CSS and going to be looking at the challenge of the grid, the multi-layered background, which has these radial lines. It's got a shader beneath it, which creates this cool effect. You can see it kind of matches up to the columns within the grid as well. Really nice touch. Of course, we'll look at the typography and the buttons and the responsiveness. So as we scale down, we see change in how the text section's positioned and the prism and the kind of colored background scales down. So here's the end result. If we do a side by side, we'll notice that we get pretty close given the time spent on it. There are a few improvements that still could be made, like it scales down nicely. We have the responsiveness, but the gradient is a little bit offset, so some positioning or some repositioning in that is needed there, like an alternative class. But our shader handles the resize so that when we switch from 12 columns down to 8 columns, we'll see that the positioning of the kind of column divide in the animation is still working. And in fact, I noticed on the Vercel site, I don't think it does that. So it's not actually matching up anymore here. So could argue we've got some better logic. Yeah, it's been a fun one. I make a few wrong turns and I've left those in the video for two reasons, because it's useful to just see how problems are kind of discovered along the way and then solved. It's quite difficult to have a perfect plan of action from the very beginning, and if I did that, you wouldn't get to see kind of like real world challenges. So I think this is a good project to follow along with. You can code along and yeah, by the end of it, you'll be delivering something that is almost on par with the Vercel website header. Hope you enjoy. Please give this a thumbs up and consider subscribing. If you want to check out the code, you can find that in the GitHub repo, link in description. And this will also be live on my website, so you can head over to Pragmatic Vercel app and find Vercel header rebuild in the menu. Without further ado, let's dive in. All right, let's take a look at what we're going to be doing then. The top section here is within the main tag. Slightly unusual for just sort of a subsection of the page to be inside the main. I don't know exactly why they've done that. I'd have expected sort of all of these blocks to be within that main element. But within that, we've got our grid here. That contains in the foreground the content block section, where the heading and subheading call to action buttons are. So that will be sat within the grid. Within the grid, we also have the grid lines. So they've got a series of divs here. If I take that out, see it removes those lines there. There's also the logo with the kind of prism line effects on it. So that sits at the front. So I'll delete that. We can see how that is. There's the canvas and another SVG. So this SVG sits on top of the canvas. If we take that out, so that removes the lines coming out here. So that's actually not part of the canvas, and the canvas is running the custom shader to create this kind of like wavy effect, and you see it actually matches up to the grid columns, which is a really nice effect. The shader itself, if we inspect it, doesn't actually contain the colors though. So if I take off the background color from this div, see that by removing that gradient, we no longer see the shader. But if I say put this to gray instead, now we can see that the canvas itself is doing this. So that's the effect that is running in here. See, it matches up to the grid columns, and it kind of fades out vertically. There's also a noise grain effect going on in there, which you can see in here. So that'll be part of the shader work in order to get that set up. Okay, so I've created a new page within the Next.js project. I've started by just setting up a main element with width full, overflow X hidden, pure black background, and pure white text. So this will be the kind of outermost container for the content. What I want to do is create a kind of a wrapper for our grid. So our grid is sat here in the middle, but it doesn't scale to the full width. If we see as we come in, it then gets smaller like so, and it actually reaches a point at which the number of columns is reduced and the placement of our main text changes. So it's no longer starting in the second column. It begins at the first column in the first row. So we'll create a wrapper for this grid and put some grid column and row classes on it. So this is the wrapper. So the wrapper will be, say, width full with a max width of, say, 1080 pixels for correct border, just for visibility purposes. And then this will be the grid. So we'll have, at the smallest viewport, it has 8 columns, and as it gets larger, it changes to 12. So I'll say that. Number of rows. So on the larger viewport, we've got 8 rows. At this point, we've also got 8. The grid will have a width full. So this currently doesn't have any height. So I need to figure out how to get a correct height onto the grid itself. So they're using a variable for the height. Medium height, large height. So I presume that they are setting those based off of the viewport size. Important thing to achieve here is to maintain a kind of square aspect ratio for all of these lines over the top of the grid cells, basically. We'll come to the lines in a bit. So I'll put this text block in, so that's quite an easy place to get started. create this as a section actually. Okay, so main heading block. So I'll put in our heading and our paragraph. And this grid sits within the outer grid, so, or this, so this block. So on the class names, we will have grid col, grids, sorry, col start 2 and col span 10. And it also spans 4 rows. Starting on the second row. Okay. Sorry, row start 2. Okay, so that's sat within here. We need on this, we need to flex a line. Justify. Actually, the grid has to have the max width on it, not the that. There we are. Okay. I think actually the width is a bit greater than 1080. I'm going to create some padding at the top. Just going to put a large section of padding up here just to push down that grid. Okay. So now I'm going to want some bit of styling on these. Where's the size? Font size 46, which is a dynamic clamp function. I could take this exactly. We're going to want it centered and bold. Okay, paragraph. We've got this color here. Font size 20, which is again a variable. So using a lot of variables for sizing. Probably need to come back to that and put some responsive styling on these. Okay, that's centered and it also has a max width. Maybe 2XL. going to want to center the content within this div as well and put some padding on it. So it's got equal padding around each edge. We can make it flex, flex col, center the items both directions, and put a gap between the content. It's closer. Okay, and the buttons, we'll pop those in. Obviously buttons should be created as components, but for this, I don't think we're going to do that. Probably just create the classes. So these are actually anchor tags linking out to getting started. Basically got a white, fully rounded white button with black text and a off-black border. So they're not actually using pure white. Pure white can be quite harsh on the eyes when you have it on a black background. I'll swap that pure white up here as well, which makes me question actually if the page itself has a. Oh, so that is the background of the page is actually pure black, but the background of the border color on the buttons is super dark gray. So we'll use our off-white color there, and then we'll create a border with that. We're going to make it fully rounded full. Font medium, text large. Switch it to an anchor tag. Okay, so the text needs to be black. Cool. All right, bit of padding. Normally put more padding on the horizontal axes as to the vertical. I think the font's slightly too large and could do with being marginally bolder. Okay, cool. Has a hover state, which adjusts the background color slightly. It also needs the cursor pointer. Okay, I can turn on the hover here. Oh, that doesn't seem to be doing anything. I'll just put in a slightly darker grey colour for now. Doesn't need to be exact. Okay, so got a hover on the button. Close all these. Secondary CTA link. Should get that in. What I think I'd do next is probably later on extract out the kind of link button classes, then reuse those. So we've got our off black and off white color here again, but just in reverse. And the border is semi-transparent. Copy that text in. Okay, so the text will be the same as the white. Key. So we need these two buttons to be within their own sort of stack here. So that means wrap them in a div, put it flex, put a gap between them. Okay. The border on the dark button definitely has just needs to be more transparent. Yeah, like that. And the gap here is also a bit too small at the moment. I need to put some tracking on the heading size. It's currently way too spread, and also this seems to have tracking tighter on it as well. See, that's matching up a lot more closely now. I'll put tight on the paragraph. It's also got a greater leading or line height in here. That sort of spaces it out, makes it a bit nicer to look at. Relaxed, yeah. There seems to be some sort of like pretty or word break or something to make it. It just is nicely split over two lines. It kind of isn't doing what mine's doing here at the moment. Now part of that could just be that the width is too wide, which does almost solve that issue. The buttons could do with a bit more space in between it, but we don't really want that space in between these. So if I stick it on the div here, some top margin, I'll just push those down a bit. Yeah, okay. Okay, well that's the basic markup for the top section. I'll come back later and do the refactor the buttons and add the icons when we're looking at this other one down here. The layout changes as the viewport gets narrower, so need to put some dynamic grid positioning on this main heading block. So currently it's starting at 2 and spanning 10, but we only want that to happen when it's wider. So I'll see how medium looks, and what we'll do is we'll just do col span full, and the row start, where's that, here, we'll start at 2 on the medium. Yeah, cool. So now that jumps up to the top position, which is what we want. It's actually happening earlier than theirs is, but I don't think that's an issue, because in fact I'd probably argue that on theirs at this size, that heading and text is getting a bit small here. I think I actually prefer using the medium breakpoint for it as opposed to the small one. Yeah, that's the positioning of the heading block done. The paragraph size, though, that does need to scale too. So the font size jumps at that point there. As also, no, it's just the font size that's changing. So we've got XL, we put that on the medium and we'll just make it large. Yeah, okay, that's working nicely. All right, let's start to make it colorful, shall we? I think there's going to be a bit of a challenge getting these grid lines in. So yeah, I'll kind of park that for now, come back to it in a bit. But let's inspect the SVG elements and copy them into Figma. So this one is the logo. It's actually within a bigger frame so that it can scale to the size of the grid, and this polygon will remain in that position. So if I copy that into Figma, so we've got this here. The reason it's black is because the fill is actually a variable, and that's to do with whether it's on dark or light mode, but we'll just concentrate on the dark mode for now, so we're not going to concern ourselves with that. But the lines are black, the polygon is white. So if we make this white, are all those lines? Doesn't look quite right, does it? I'll copy the SVG into the code. Logo prism. Whoa, it's wide, okay. What we could do here, just to test something, is if we actually put on the style the variables, so just background and foreground. put that in here. Need to import the function component definition. Okay, so it's still not looking quite right with black. What happens if this is black and the lines are white? Yeah, so that's the correct way around. Okay, cool. Now the triangle prism is absolute, and we will do col span full and row span full so that it covers all of them. It's got too big here. That's because, well, two reasons. One, it's not even within the grid, so we need that, and also the grid needs to be relative. Yeah, okay. Now the size of it looks about right. I think the grid's actually a bit too big in our version, so where's that max width? Here. Okay. All right, that's that SVG, and we'll need to sort out the sizing of the grid in a bit. The other SVG is the one with all of the lines in it. So where's that? It's not that one. That's the gradient color, and that's the other SVG here. Okay, so yeah, we can see that it kind of masks out to the center point. I think we can do the same thing. So if I create another component and just pop that SVG code in. Background lines. Okay. So yeah, we've got the black outline class here. These again have a fill, which is determined by our variable. Now I could actually hoist up these variables, stick them on the main, and then they can apply to both of these SVGs. Again, absolute, col span full, row span full. It's got some scale on it now. Don't know if that's relevant or not. All right, cool. You can see the lines in here. Let me put a background color on the grid just for debugging purposes. We need to set the Z or the relative of the heading block section. We don't need to use relative. It does have a background on it. I'm going to put it as black for now. I may need to tweak that. Yeah, it doesn't actually have a background color because we can see the lines coming through here, but it does sit on top of those blackout lines. So if I put the background to, for now, just gonna say do white 10, we'll take that off later. I don't think the lines should be white like they are. Oh no, they're not. It's because the background here is like that, so okay. The issue with the positioning of stuff is that we're seeing is that the grid isn't maintaining, it's not the correct aspect ratio. So this circle where the lines come out from should be sort of perfectly around the SVG sphere, but it sorry, the triangle, but it's not at the moment. I want to see what happens if I put width and height full on these instead of col span, or just size full, which will achieve the same thing. And do it on the background as well. Okay. All right, let's put in the colored gradient background now. I'm gonna delete some of these till I can find it. All right, so yeah, we'll see in the dark theme that we've got this gradient here on the background. I think I'll just try putting that in as a class. It's going to sit beneath both of these. I don't think Tailwind will like these spaces. We shall see in a moment. No, so that hasn't worked like so. All right, what I'm going to do is, I mean, this could be put as a custom theme element within Tailwind, but we can also just do it like this for now. Hopefully that works. Next we've got all these variables that we don't have values for, so that's gonna be the next challenge. The colors will just be pulled in like so. Okay, that'll cover the colors, but the angles, 180 and 70%. Okay. Still got an issue there. What's that? I mean, it doesn't show that there's an. It doesn't show a problem. Is it this 180 that's not right? Yeah, okay. Okay, cool. So that's put in the color. We've actually got another layer that's basically going over the top of that to kind of fade it out like that. So we're going to need to locate that. Okay, so they've got a radial gradient that is been applied before on this entire section. So this is essentially the same as putting this in here. Okay, so that's the color done. I think we could tidy that up a bit later. I'm gonna remove the border on the green and the background there so we can see how it's looking. Take off the border as well. Okay, it's coming together. I'm going to put a border on the grid. Take it off of the outer section. All right, nice. So yeah, next up we're going to try and get the sizing of this section to be correct aspect ratio so that these grid cells are all square. Okay, so there are a few ways that we could tackle the grid sizing. If we inspect this, we'll see that their width is a computed value, which is this function here that's using the width of the guides, the grid, margin, etc., to calculate this. I don't really want to have to configure all of these variables, especially trying to do it all in Tailwind with like dynamic sizing is going to be a pain. So I'm going to try an alternative method, which and we'll just see how that works. And what I'm thinking is just to map aspect square divs across the whole grid, and we'll put those. Yeah, we'll put those in and see what happens with regards to the sizing of it. So I'm going to put this grid blocks. So I can create a grid here, and I can do grid subgrid. Is it just subgrid or grid rows subgrid? So that will take the parent's grid system, so our 8 columns or 12 columns, and then we can map children into it. And if we put these as aspect square, put a border on them, so the array will be 12 times 8, right? So we'll need 96, I think, just to test out this. Okay, so we've got one showing. Why have they not been positioned correctly? Maybe we need to do col span full and row span full as well. Yeah, okay. Yeah, cool. Do have an issue that when we get smaller though, we've got too many of those. I'm not sure if this approach is going to work. I mean, if we look at the grids that they've got here, they've actually got all of these. You can't see them, but they are forming the lines. So put border on it. It doesn't have a left or top border. So we'd have border B. And border R. All right, so we need to fix the issue of the resizing. So basically, when we're at a smaller size, we're going to need a dynamic class to hide some of these. So we know that at the smallest size that there are 8 by 8, 64, as opposed to 96. So we could say, we could add a class where, what do we want to do? We want to basically say if the index is greater than 63, then it's hidden if it's medium. So you say I greater than 63 and hidden or medium block. Still doesn't seem to have. think this is, maybe this actually needs to be absolute, the heading. I'm going to put the borders on these too much paler grey. That hasn't worked. Turn that off. Okay, now I can't see them. Okay. All right, so the layout of these is right. The remaining square, something's happened with this heading becoming absolute though. Has that fixed it? No. I think we want to place content in the center of the grid. What's happening with this? So I just can't see the border on that at all now. Yeah, I think when it's at medium, we're actually defining an explicit column for it to start and a row for it to start, but then we're not doing that at the smaller breakpoint, so it's causing it to kind of just push down there. So what we want to say is col start 1, row start 1. Yeah, okay, that keeps it in place. The grid probably should have overflow hidden on it. Yeah, these are actually getting out of sync now. So I'll have to fix that in a bit. We do have a grid in place though. Now let's get the correct colors of these lines. So there's an outer line on this. One of these has a border. Actually, see, this is pushed down, and I think that's causing this to move down because at the moment ours is up here, but we don't want it to be up there. We need to force that down so that's aligned. Okay, so border, that's got a black border on the bottom. Yeah, I don't know what, I can't find the actual border color. Okay, here we are. So we've got a white 9% for our border color. So what we can do is on our outer grid, take the background off, put a border. Okay, so that gives us the outside line, and then on each of these divs that have been mapped in here, we'll stick our variable color in. Alright, so now it's looking a lot closer to the kind of desired result. We need to handle not assigning borders to these this set of divs within here. See how none of these have a border on them. We also need to push down the background gradient and the SVG lines. See, they're kind of ending beneath that text, but on the version we're working on, they're up here, so they need to shift down somewhat. So that's one thing. I will look at shifting the gradient down. So there was something in here that was essentially offset within the grid. See here, the gradient itself doesn't start at the top. It doesn't actually even start one row down, which is slightly odd. It's kind of a different amount. It's got, does it have a top value? So that's containing the canvas. So all of these background elements basically are inside something that is pushing them all down. Oh look, it's got a transform on it. And that's 1.2 row height. So we're talking about here essentially this whole section for the background. So I can put this in like this. We can do absolute size full on the container. That should have no visible effect. Okay, and then yeah, we can either just transform it down by one. We're not actually tracking the row height. We don't have that variable because it's just been done dynamically. So for now, what I'll do is I'll just put a percentage margin top. So let's push those down. It's actually pushed the prism down, which we don't want. But the positioning of the background gradient and the lines is now not coming into the text, so that's good. That's kind of what we wanted. Just need to take the logo prism out. Okay, getting close to the full size version. There are some issues with the resizing of the grid when it gets too small though, at this point. Okay, so now let's look at the grid lines, the grid guidelines. Sort of two things that need doing. We need to remove them from this central block, and we need to add our little cross up here. So to remove them, basically we need to apply another conditional class here that's going to say if I'm at medium size screen and my index is so this is up to what, index 11, so 12. So if my index is from 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So my index is from 13 to 22. I'm going to have no border. Index greater than 12 and index less than 23, the border will be none. Alright, so that has taken those out there, but that needs to be that. So yeah, we've kind of removed a block of borders in that logic there. We need to revisit this for the smaller size when that positioning changes. I think there must be a way to do this that's not so manual. So might look at refactoring that later, but then we've got 23, 24. So we'll do the next row, which will be I greater than 23. Okay, so it's taken these out, hasn't taken those two out there, so we need to, it's 12, isn't it? For now, I'm going to make the border brighter, just so we can see it a bit more clearly. What have we got on here? We've got border left none, top none, but we are applying a bottom and a right. So we're applying it here. So this one actually, we're going to need to figure something out for that, because there's always going to be that one along here that's got a border on it. In fact, is that the, that's fine, it's the next row. Yeah, so here, that last row, we do want a border bottom. We just don't want a border right. And then the final column over here, we're going to also need to take out that border. Kind of don't really like how I'm doing this as I'm doing it, but we can look at affecting this later. So basically, if the index is at 21, so yeah, if the I equals 22, sorry. Is that right? So if the index is 21, border bottom 0, should be that one there, right? This is index 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Yeah, okay. All right, so yeah, that's what we need for those last ones. So rather than doing that, we'd do that. And the same for this one. Whew, got there in the end. This is going to need to be looked at for the small view size, because once we get down, we need to change all those indexes. So I'm going to revisit that a bit later. Okay, cool. How is it looking side by side then? This button, yeah, incorrect hover state, and also it's a lot wider. I think that they just have an equal width on them to balance it. That's quite nice way of doing it. So those anchors, put a min width of say 24 is too small. Okay, that's about right. We'll just need to center the text. In fact, I'll make them flex because we're going to need to add the icon in there later. So they'll need a flex with a gap. Obviously, this button or anchor component could be extracted out. Okay, so what we've got is the most of it set up, to be honest, except the shader. The little cross up here, so I'll inspect that. I assume it's an SVG or a div, but finding it may be a challenge. So yeah, I can either just create an SVG and pop it up there, or create some divs with different borders on them. As long as it's a 1 pixel SVG, 1 pixel border SVG, I think that approach is probably actually fine. So if I create a small frame, let's make it say 24, 24. Okay, let's give it a light grey color. I can export this as cross, grid cross. I've used 23 width so that the border sits on a pixel rather than offset. New laptop, nothing on it. All right, import our little cross. Now I want it inside the grid, but I want it kind of just so that it'll be positioned absolutely outside of it. So I need to turn off overflow hidden for now. Position it, sorry, absolute, and then we can do top 0, left 0 with a negative translation by 50% or a half. And the same on the Y. To import the next image. Oh no, we do have that. That's because that should be source. Okay, so that's actually worked exactly how I wanted, which is mildly surprising. It is a little bit too bright though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use white with, actually no, I can't have an opacity because it will clash with the line below it. So it does need to be a solid color. As we had it, it just needs to be a little bit darker. In fact, maybe a little bit smaller as well. I'm going to leave the size alone because it was working. Okay, nice. So that's the some of the grid there. We've got the overflow issue here now. So I'm going to have to fix that. Because if I put overflow hidden on the main grid, we're cropping that cross out, which we don't want to do. Because our background is here, we sort of need a way of, we do need to kind of crop this somehow. Without the margin, we sit inside nicely, but everything's pushed up too high. What I could do though is put the margin on the separate elements like that, and then the background lines as well. Something's not right with that. So we've got the absolute container for the background elements that need shifting down. I think put padding top on here. Just try some sort of percentage. So that is pushing it down correctly. We've still got our cross visible, so okay. So the circle, if we notice here, is coming just below the bottom. So maybe it needs slightly more padding than that at this breakpoint anyway, but that's looking good. Okay, cool. This is good progress. Some issues still with the responsiveness of the grid. It's kind of breaking out of the size, and obviously all the lines, the borders need adjusting for the mobile sizing, so I need to kind of create a better system for that. And also at this narrow size, there needs to be some padding, like horizontal margin. You see up here there's a gap, which we don't currently have, and so it's causing the cross to be cut off in that top left corner. All right, so yeah, we need to fix the width of the grid. At the moment, we are basically saying it's width full with a max width of 1080, but we kind of need some padding on here. So that does help. Maybe we do that. This is a bit more padding. Actually, no, the padding's fine like that, but the size of the cross needs to be dynamic. So say we start on size 4, like that. Maybe even smaller. Size 3, and then do small size 4 and medium size 5. Yeah, actually the issue of the SVG scaling like this is that the border width is becoming thinner, which we don't really want. We possibly need to just insert that as an SVG, and then we can control the dimensions of it whilst retaining its stroke width. We've got the grid cross, and we have the asset for that. Create a component for that then. This clip path seems redundant. I think really what we want are lines. I got this like y1, which doesn't need to be a negative value, nor So it's X value stays the same for this one, Y value stays the same for this one. This X2 probably needs... I thought we'd go from 0 to 23. All right, let's see what happens when we put that in place of this. And we copy over our classes. So just make it absolute for now. And we also want to translate it so that it's offset. Okay, so the grid's, that's still showing up there, which is good. In order to resize it though, we need to change the height of it without affecting the height and width, without affecting the line, the stroke width. How can we do that with a Tailwind class, I wonder? Because I suspect if I set the size to 3, we just get the same issue that this, yeah, that's scaling down as well. So either we just switch the method to 4 divs, sorry, do 4 divs or 2 divs even. Maybe just putting 2 divs up there is a neater solution because you don't have to consider scaling this, because we'd have to change the view box dynamically and the line sizes, so it's just, yeah, it's just getting too fiddly, so we're going to scrap that approach. And then what we can do here is do the absolute with the dynamic sizing. And then this one will be aspect square, and it will have border R. Let's just put white on for now. And the other one will have border top. Need to position these, so top 0, left 0 for Z index. Okay, so they're on top of each other. One of them sits inside and the other is translated fully on the X and Y. So put on X and Y translate. Yeah, kind of. They're not actually matching up though. Let's try doing this. Bring that one in by a pixel. Okay. Yeah, so now they're overlapping, which is what we want. And then we just need to take off the borders, so the other borders on these. So So that one's the inside one actually. So that should have border L and T. Like that. Then the other one, it doesn't need the bottom border, it actually only needs the right border. Oh no, it does need the bottom border. Alright, got there in the end of the little cross thing. Okay, so now it scales down. This is what we want. It's too big though. Maybe 2.5 for that. And to pull these classes out because they're used in both places. Get the grey colour that we found. Alright, so we'll go up to size 4 on the larger screen. And then all we need to do is join that class with the one that shows the appropriate border edge. So this one is B and R. Actually, this one has slightly different positioning. So the left and top is relevant for this one. Okay. So much fuss for a little cross. A little cross that's still too big. Hallelujah, I think we've done it. Okay, that's the grid system and background, foreground content, at least set up for full size display. Okay, there's too much padding at the top of this, so it's not quite aligning to the source. So we reduce this down a bit. All right, yeah, it's looking good. Obviously the scroll bar's pushing it over, but other than that, I think it's matching up nicely. I need to fix this issue with the grid lines on the smaller viewport size. So at this point, none of this top section should have the grid lines, only the ones below. So we've got this grid block here, and what we're doing was conditionally rendering them based on the index, but it's going to get too complicated doing it like this for both sets. So what I think we could do is treat this block as the medium size, grid. So we just we'll just make it hidden, and then when it's medium, we'll make it block. Or sorry, we'll make it grid at medium size. So when we get to our layout shift, now we don't have anything there. And then we can create another one for the small size. And this is where we'll have 64 items in the array. It will be hidden at medium and grid at normal size. I'm going to put the border color back up so that it's a bit easier to see. Now the indexes on the smaller one should be easier. What we want is for the first 4 rows and all columns to have no border on them, except the last row will have border. I think we're putting border bottom on it. So if it's less than what we've got 8, so 1632. In fact, we could potentially just stick one div that spans that entire top section and then just map 32 of them. Because that's, I think, all we need, right? We can just maybe put div in here and do col span 8 or full and row span 4. Yeah, so that is closer. We'll actually put border top. So we'll want a border top of that color and a border R. Okay. We do have some overlap on the edges here, which might need looking at. But that's the actual layout that we want there. Okay, so now there's an issue with the height of this, in that for some reason the grid container is growing bigger than we want it to. So we see how this happens. What happens here? I mean, the text is, for starters, quite a bit smaller. Certainly on the paragraph and the buttons as well. I think that they might be contributing to pushing the size of the grid up too much. So where we've got our heading section, like this block here, this has got a padding 8 value on it, which is probably too big. In fact, it probably doesn't even need any padding. So now the grid is not being pushed out of size, but the sizing of all that content is, it's too big. So we've got text large. We could just leave that as text base size, or even text small, and then make it medium at the small breakpoint, like so. we've got a max width on both of these. They're not filling the full size, so that's not working. Let's try a percentage. Can we do 2/3? The gap's actually also too big at this small screen size on the containing block here. So we've got a gap of 6, which we want at, say, the medium breakpoint, but we probably just want a smaller gap like that. Maybe even 2. We can add a midpoint for the small. Okay, so that's looking better. The buttons, the anchors also need some sizing, and yeah, that text should be having a max width. So on the I think we can do unset or none. Yeah, we can just stick a max width also on the paragraph. And that'll give us our 3 lines. And then small will have max width XL. Alright, the buttons are taking up way too much space, so do we want to create a class for these? Maybe we will just extract this out. So the width is not going to be 48. That will be on the larger screens. They also got a conditional label that's start deploying or switches to deploy, which is interesting. Alright, let's just do define some button props. What we'll do is we'll pass the label in as a React node. And then we can put classes on the spans that we pass in. And then we'll just have variant as, for now, light or dark. Obviously this is not comprehensive. Okay, cool. And then if we create a Tailwind merge class, we use Tailwind merge so that we can pass through a custom class name and it will merge that correctly. It will resolve any conflicts. So we pass the class name in. Now, there are certain classes that are variant specific. So what we can do here, and the way I'd approach this would be, say, have like variant classes and then do a record of each like this. We have the text color, the background color. We also have the border color. So on the light button, which is the white one, we have a black border like that. And then the dark one, let's just give it, say, a pure black border. We'll also have some hover classes, which we need to take out. So the light button has a white background. When it's hovered, it will go slightly whiter like that, whereas the other one has a black background. So when that's hovered, we will just go to pure black. Same as the border. Where was that anchor used? So here's the other one. So this one, I actually gave the border a reduced opacity on the light one. Sorry, on the dark button. Alright, cool. So then what we can do is apply those classes based on the variant and then spread in the class name, the label as well. Obviously this is called a button and we're actually using an anchor tag, but we're not doing anything with that. Maybe we'll create a button for it and then we could wrap it with a next link or anchor tag if we wanted. So those buttons are here. In fact, we don't need a label. We could just pass children through. That'll make this a bit simpler. So we can use the props with children to wrap our props, and then we have the children here, like so. So there's start deploying, and then there's deploy. So those are the two different labels that we've got depending on the view width. So we'll put deploy first. And then this one will be hidden at medium. And this one will be hidden. And then block at medium so that it appears. So we need a variant on our button. All right, does that look right? Yeah, I think we switched to the different children at small, not medium. Okay, we've got get a demo, take that out. All right, cool. Now the sizing of them is not correct because the font size and the padding's too great on the smaller size. So what we'll probably do is say padding 1.5 and then small padding 3 or 2.5. Might actually be 2. 2 and 3. Yeah, and then the font size as well. So so we'll start on text small, and then at small we'll go to text base. There's now too big a gap between those two as well. So we got our buttons, and the gap here is 6, but we can say put that to 4. Yeah, so that's looking a lot better. I think the border color's too bright. On that one there, it looks like it's the same border as what's on the grid, which is like a 9% white. So where the dark has this border, we could actually just do the variable border color. It just hasn't worked. Oh yeah, it has worked. I've just made it lighter. So when we put the opacity back down on that, kind of, the button border does look brighter. And maybe it's an outline. Because it looks like on here you can't really tell, but you can actually see the lines coming through there. But you can't when the border's that white for some reason. Anyway, can fiddle around with the exact button style later. The main thing missing is obviously the icon here, and then we've gonna have another variation of an icon down there. Their hover state for a button's not making it black, it's actually making it lighter. That's not a big issue right now. The next challenge is going to be the shader, because whilst this looks quite tidy and it's now scaling as we'd expect, it doesn't have that like dynamic movement that we see here. And this is quite subtle, but if we take out some of these layers, we can have another look at what we're working with. So it's in here, we've got our canvas and our gradient and those lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this div itself, is it full opacity? This is the one with our background, basically. It does seem to have full opacity, but maybe the canvas is sat on top of it. Because the canvas has a 30% opacity. So that really brings out what's happening. Makes it a lot clearer. So what we want to do is position the canvas on top and then reduce its opacity. I wonder if there's any sort of blending modes going on here. Doesn't look like it, at least not on that. Oh yeah, so this has got hard light. So the gradient has the mixed blend on it. The canvas beneath it has a reduced opacity, but is essentially grayscale. So if we change the colors in here again, just make it gray. This is the effect that the shade is running. All right, I have some code for a GLSL shader. So we go and find that. We used it on the Stripe website. Clone. So the kind of one of the lightest ways to just run a canvas GLSL shader is, well, I found using this GLSL canvas JS just simplified it quite a lot. And we can just initialize the class here with a ref to our canvas. Maybe better ways to do this, but this is quite simple and works and don't require a heavy framework like 3JS. So what I'm going to do is, for now, I'm just going to probably copy this into a new file and call it Vercel canvas. I'm going to leave it as absolute with the size full. Take off the transform. We have a width of 1080 and a height of 720. So I'm going to put that on it. Okay, cool. And then just before doing any of the GLSL shader code, I'm going to delete this. I'm just going to return a solid color. So if we do, say, just a random color like that, we'll know if it's working or not, basically. So if we import this, going to want it to go within that offset background container at the bottom here. What you'll need to do is this has a mixed blend mode of hard light on it. And that's our colored gradient. Okay, so now is this color coming through? So if we make it red, which would be that, yeah. Okay, so we are seeing that red come through now. So that fragment shader is working, which is good. If we make it 111, we will be outputting a pure white value. Okay, cool. So that's the kind of canvas is set up. It's using the GLSL canvas to initiate the custom vertex and fragment shader. So I'm gonna now have a play with the shader code and see where I can get. All right, so what I've done is moved the fragment shader code into its own file, and this will allow me to use the pragma utility to import functions from npm modules. So in this case, it'll allow us to bring in our noise function. In order to get this to work, you will have to check the next config of this project. So we have the GLSify and GLSify loader set up, and we also have these packages, GLSify import and loader, as well as raw loader here. Yep, and then in order for TypeScript to not throw any errors, there's a type definition file for fragment file types. So that will allow us to import this without any errors. So now we're importing the fragment shader. The vertex shader is just a generic one. It's not, we're not kind of mutating any of the points. That's fine. The header fragment shader, we'll need to create a grain effect. So we can do that using kind of high frequency noise. Yeah, I see I had a little play a second ago, but yeah, this grainy texture here. So that's one part. The other part will be the moving waves, which are kind of gradient lines almost that are striped here. And then finally, they're kind of divided and offset by the number of columns, so that there's a sort of sharp line that matches up to the grid on top of it. So what we can start with is the grain effect. That's probably the easiest one. I may kind of stop and pause this throughout if I feel like I'm hitting a wall and don't want to waste much of your time. So yeah, if we create a noise value, now the noise value, the noise function is 3-dimensional, so it takes vector 3. So if I VV, and then we can pass in third value, which will keep constant because the noise isn't actually moving. I mean, we could move it, but it's not moving. And then we can define, say, a background color and our noise color, so the color of the grains. And for now, if we just make this almost white, so 0 is black and 1 is white. So we'll make it really bright, and then what we can do is create color. So if we define our, say, noise color as being a mix of those two, and then if we output that as a vector 4, so these are vector 3s, which are RGB values in the context of color, and then a vector 4 adds the alpha layer, so that's just one. Now we've got something here. It might be easier if we actually remove some of the layers just for this part of it. So if I take out the main heading block, if I just comment this out, and maybe comment on the prism, and then the color as well, so that's this one. Now we just can see the effect that we're getting from our shader. If we multiply the UV value by kind of a significant value, then we get the grainier effect. So that might work. We could go a bit higher. I don't think it's actually that much. And obviously the intensity of that color is less. So we're kind of looking at something more like that for the noise. So that gives us that. The waves will be a little more challenging. We're going to need to create a moving gradient of lines, basically. Okay, after bit of fiddling around, maybe 20 minutes or so, I've managed to end up with this. So as you can see, it's animating the kind of wavy gradient along the x-axis, and each of the columns have their own kind of offset. So by comparison, this is the Vercel shader running. They do have like these different angles that are coming in, and that they're sort of shifting for each of the columns, whereas the one that I've just put together is kind of moving more linearly on the x-axis. So obviously there's definitely room for improvement, but the color shading and the noise looks pretty accurate. So hoping that when we add the color back on, we will end up with a similar looking result. So if I run through the code here, I've kind of hard coded that there are 12 columns. I've defined a wave A and B color, so it's really just the to and from, where the A color is a dark gray and the B color is a lighter gray. I fiddled with these vec3 values to get the values that look about right. So it's, yeah, the light and dark shades. So create the noise, played around with the kind of value on the UV to end up with something that looks grainy but not too small. Then basically create the columns by multiplying the absolute x by 12 or by 6, because that's what's needed to be done there. And then it's just a for loop where a new UV value is created, and then for each of those columns generating a unique noise value which takes the index as its parameters and then normalizes it between 0 and 1. So we then end up with a random value between 0 and 1 for each of the columns. We can then add that or subtract that from the original UV, which then sort of will shift it along randomly. And then with that different x coordinate, we can create a sine wave which multiplies it in order to give kind of greater amplitude. If I increase that, then we see more lines like that. So it's kind of a case of just fiddling around with how many of those we want to see. Perhaps that's about right. And then we add time with the multiplier so that it moves more quickly. So if we change the time value there, we get much faster movement. But that's moving at about the right pace. So with this wave value, which is a sine value between -1 and 1, we can just mix that between our two colors, so our A and B. So it will then kind of oscillate between the gradient colors. So that's create that, and then we're mixing our wave color with our final color using the column index. Some of this code was actually kind of auto-completed. I just tweaked it and filled around with it, played around with it a bit to refine it. And then finally, once we've gone through all the columns, then it's a case of mixing the noise over the top. So it's 15%, it's 15% noise. If we did 0.5, we'd see much more noise, but we don't want it to be too strong. And then we're outputting that. So yeah, that's the fragment shader code. Obviously, if I was going to spend longer on it, I would look at a way of applying a kind of angle and maybe creating multiple waves. It looks like they've kind of got 2 or 3 simultaneous waves that are happening, and they're sort of shifting in amongst themselves. So that would really kind of elevate it. But this is a good start, I would say. There's not too much code here either. So if I add back in the color, so now we can see that that's over the top. Obviously our canvas had a reduced opacity. So now we've got our lines showing. By adding that back in. Add the prism back. Cool. Add the main heading block back. All right. Now, yeah, the intensity of the canvas is too high, so let's just knock the opacity down. Yeah, okay. So how's that compared to there? I mean, it might be slightly too dark still. Okay, yeah, I think that's good progress. The columns are becoming out of sync, and that also there's an issue with the sizing of the prism on the smaller version, so that needs looking at. The columns in the grid or in the shader are currently hard coded at 12. So for the small viewport, we actually need 8 so that they match up to those. Now we need to pass that through as a uniform. So we'd have view columns. We take this out, and then wherever we've used columns here, take that away, and then I think I need to just check the docs and find out how you add a uniform to this. So set uniform hasn't worked because there's no value there when it loads. So is there like an on? I'm not sure how you just define the initial uniforms, to be honest. All right, so you can set the uniform using the set uniform method. So we can say uColumns is 12, let's say, to just get it working. But this is actually throwing an error because the loop index cannot be compared with non-constant expression. So this loop here doesn't like the fact that we are using a varying here. So I suppose ChatGPT, its suggestion was if we set the max columns and then if the U columns value is less than that, we just return out. So so now, yeah, so now we've got this. Column, not column, U columns. Still got lots of errors here, but it is actually running. What I can do in the canvas is if we get the width of the viewport like that, pass that into the effect. If there's no width because it hasn't calculated it yet, we can just return out. But then what we can do is set the uniform based off of the width. So the breakpoint at which we switch grid size is medium, so 768. So if we say width is less than 768 and then we say it's 8 columns or it's 12, it's not going to actually dynamically resize. Maybe we need to set that in its own use effect actually. And then we need to put this into a ref. Like that. And then we can do GLSL.current. Yeah, so now these are actually lining up still, even though we've changed the size. Okay, cool, that's good. Getting pretty tired after this stint, so gonna probably wrap up here and then tackle the remainder tomorrow. It's looking good. Still some work on the shader that could be done, but the responsiveness is there. A little bit of refinement to do with the sizing here and the prism placement. That's not quite right. And of course the button's missing the icon, and then there's the section down below where we're gonna handle these tabs and the animated ring beneath them. So we'll create a component to do that, and then we'll have checked off this challenging section. All right, back to it. It's a new day, but for continuity, I thought I would wear the same hoodie and beanie. All right, so the next steps will be we need to fix the mobile positioning. At the moment, compared to the Vercel site, we've got a kind of too large section down here. These grid cells aren't maintaining the sort of square aspect ratio. There seems to be a gap between it. This entire grid is sort of stretching too much like this. There's a few issues with like the font sizing as well. So here we've got kind of even padding within this block. So we actually should put padding on that. Whereas here we don't have this, and the text is a bit too large as well. So yeah, I'm gonna have to take a look at the mobile bit, update the button to include the icon, so the triangle logo in deploy, and also the outline, which has a transparent color to it, so you can see the lines coming through, which is quite a nice touch. And at the moment we've just got a solid color border. So yeah, gonna have to do that. What else we got? The just generally reviewing the code, adding any comments. I know for a fact we need to put this balance on the heading so that we get a nicer line break. This is lying up here, whereas on our version the 2 hasn't broken to new line yet. Then as part of this for my project, I'll hide the navigation on these rebuilds, or at least I'll hide the logo up here. Okay, let's switch back to mobile responsive view. So I'm using the iPhone SE. Quite often use the SE for mobile coding responsiveness because it's the smallest screen size. And in fact, an iPhone SE doesn't have 667 pixels of available view space because we have to factor in the Safari or Chrome UI. So really you're looking at something more like this, 375 by 600. Doing it at 667 doesn't give a true representation of what the user will actually see. But what they've managed to achieve is containing this header within the viewport at that size. All right, so let's start with this text heading section and sort out the padding and the font sizing. The width of the heading, I think, is too narrow. All right, so we've got a heading block here. Currently, it has no padding on it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, say, padding 4 to give it the spacing around the edge, which looks about right. I'm going to change the max width from 60%. I'm going to try increasing that a bit. So that's already looking a lot closer. I think the padding could potentially be 5, not 4. Just give it a bit more spacing. Yeah, so that's looking good. The font size is actually slightly too large on the heading. And we can put that text balance class on here to change how the line breaking works. So text balance is text wrap balance. Yeah, so now we see we've got a more even line breaking. And I'd put that also on the heading itself, which won't have a visible effect at this size. Yeah, the font size, it is slightly smaller. The font sizing has been done using a clamp function so that its minimum size is 24 pixels. Its maximum size is 48, and then it uses the 3.75 viewport width dynamic value anywhere in between. on Vercel's site, the heading actually has font size 22. So if I take that off, then it's using the dynamic size, which matches it. But they've got a max width 375, so they've defined a specific font size for these smaller displays. In Tailwind, we can set up a custom screen. So I already have an extra small height, which is max height 667, which is basically an iPhone SE. So I can use that here instead of basing it off the width and just say text 22 pixels. So now that's matching up. And that sort of fixes the top section, or that part, this part of it. Let's just check that it still looks right. Yeah. Okay. The grid structure that we've used is currently an 8-row grid. So if we find the outer grid, so here, yeah, so it's got 8 rows, but it doesn't actually need 4 rows for this top section on mobile. So I think I'd change that so that we have 5 rows, and then at small we have 8. Now it's all kind of crushed up. This position, these blocks were kind of being used to drive the sizing of it, and this is currently spanning 4 rows, but actually we just want it to span 1 row. And we need to change the sizing of that first row, and we also need to change the sizing of the positioning of the heading block for mobile, because it's spanning 4 rows. So I think what we would say is actually we just span 1 row. Yeah, so that's a bit better. Now that this is within there, within its single row. Something's gone wrong with the rest of the grid though. It's because the rows are, by default, rows will be set to basically 1 fraction each, so they're equally heighted, and that's pushed all the others down. So what we'd actually need to define on our grid is, instead of grid rows 5, what we'd say is say 1FR auto, 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 auto. Okay, cool. So now we're basically saying you can fill up the available space. These will match the height of their contents, and their height of the contents are these grid blocks here. So the small grid size is driving that. Basically, if I take that off, we've lost those bottom rows. Just looking at this Tailwind join function is actually redundant, so take that out. I don't think we need to define the color for each of these because it's the same. So that will give us the same result. We're just defining the color once, and we can do the same down here as well, just to remove a bit of code. All right, well, the grid is looking good. It looks like they've actually got a black background on this section on mobile, because there's no bleed from the color, the gradient below. Maybe they haven't put a color on it, but yeah, they haven't put it. It just must be the positioning of the radial gradient that's kind of been used as a mask. So that's the next step, is figuring out how to move this content down into the kind of appropriate section. So at the moment, if we try and find our background container, so yeah, so this is the background container with the canvas, and these are full size, so they're matching the height of the grid. Whereas if we check the Vercel version, their background grid is actually a lot smaller. It's not filling the height of the outer container. It's going to need to get that aspect ratio. I mean, maybe this does have an aspect ratio on it or something. That might be what we need to do. It has a height and a width, but these are inferred, so this is the radial gradient. Does have a transform on it. And this is the color gradient. Yes, it's got different offset value for mobile. It's a bit fiddly, isn't it? So yeah, either we figure out how to move the gradient to this one, we need to try and move it down into this lower block. I'm going to play around with a couple of values in the editor here and see if doing something like this will work. I mean, positioning wise, that doesn't look too far off, but they do have does seem to be wider. Like the gradient itself is bigger. And so are the lines. Like the lines are, you might not be able to see, but the radial lines start here. So two grid along, whereas here they're starting over this part, which isn't right. I'm going to put pointer events none on the grid blocks just so that they are not interfering with this. So there they. Okay, so there's actually a scale on the SVG lines as well, so that they're pushed out further. So that's why they're coming out further, or at least one of the reasons. So we'd be looking at these background lines. I'm going to remove all these ones. I don't think they're really doing much. But yeah, we could put a scale of, say, 125 on here, and then at small, we'll just put scale back to 100. That's almost looks right. Like they're kind of, the radial lines are coming out to about almost that second block now, just by scaling that to 150. If I scale it to 16, yeah, that's looking right. The lines are now at least. Actually, I think they might even need to be even bigger than that. Yeah, make that bigger. Now this container of the background needs some adjustment. I take the padding off the top of it. I'm going to put a background color of, say, white. Now at the moment it's size full of the grid. What I wonder is if I can get it to have a max height, or yeah, if you set the size full on the bigger one and then just set the height to, say, 240 pixels for now, see what happens with that, and then width full, pop it to the bottom. Okay, that is position wise pretty much what we are trying to achieve on mobile. Okay, now the prism itself is like so perfectly positioned inside this grid at that size. Now I try and locate it in here. So it's actually within its own div. I don't know why this grid's so oddly offset. Not sure like why it's up here, not not down here. But yeah, this SVG is just filling that div. So let's see if we can change the position of that to get it to fit into the right place. The height being full means it's too big here. I wonder if by putting it in the div that has the columns, sorry, the rows specified on it, I wonder if that would do the trick. I put a div around it. So on mobile, we don't think we want it inside the first. I mean, the SVG is actually really big, isn't it? I mean, you just need the height to be the height of this polygon height. It needs to be 2 of those. It might have even been easier to just insert the polygon as a small asset and then be able to position it exactly within, say, 4 of those cells. I wonder if, oh, it does at this size. So this size it's the height of 2, but its width is slightly greater. All right, let's try sticking a border on this, and then do row span. I'll just do hot. Maybe I'll try putting this, having the same height of 240 pixels on the small screen. And then scaling this SVG. Let's have a play. Maybe try the origin bottom. Doesn't quite line up like that. Yeah, that's almost in the right place. But it's not going to scale correctly. If I put the width at, say, 100 something percent, the SVG needs to be at the bottom. And it is scaling now. It's completely busted here though. Where that white bits come from. What on earth is this white white background? Oh, it's here. just need to have a think about this. I think I've come to the conclusion that having that SVG within the big white space, the triangle SVG, is just impractical for like proper positioning, because what we want is for it to be inside 2 rows, and even at the larger size we still want it to be sat within two rows. So the fact that it's in this huge container actually kind of makes it a bit fiddly to position. Like having it this size, I don't think it's the optimal way to do it. So let's go back to Figma and get this out. So all of the lines need to be white, and then if we edit this and then export just the shape itself, so crop the frame down. I can hold Control to drag the frame without moving any of the contents. Yeah, so that's what we have. Let's just check that that looks correct. Yeah. Now I'm going to export this SVG. To the Vercel triangle. Now I'm going to need to rework the logo prism a little bit. So just delete all the SVG code, and you know what, I might just do it like this. Triangle prism. Import the triangle from our assets. Assign the source. Now put a class name on this, and we always want it to contain, we want it to have the height full. Now here what we can do is, I think we should just be able to say which rows and columns we want it to be positioned on. So let's say we want it on the row start 2, row span 2, and then if we do col span full, so put it across all of those, stick a border on here, and we can check how it looks. All right, nice. So we have this positioned here, and it does seem to be spanning 2. Maybe it needs to be absolute. Looks a little off-centered, but we're obviously concerned with the mobile view now. So col span full, col start 1. So it's pushing the size of the other columns up, but we don't want it to do that. I think there must be a way to have a max height. I think this is why they've actually defined the cell or column sizes, because it's not possible really to put this prism over those columns without defining kind of like without affecting the size, even if it's absolute, even though we're saying sit on top of column 2 rows, it's not doing that, it's still growing. So I think maybe we should look at creating a cell size variable, and then we want this will probably need to be a responsive variable. So maybe we're going to need to put a media query on these styles, and might actually just want to put the class, put these into a CSS file. But for now, let's say we want the cell size to be, if we're just thinking about mobile, we'd have 100 view width minus our padding divided by 8, because there are 8 columns. So this will be 8 things, and then in here we can take out the auto on the rows and columns. So on the columns we could just say repeat, I think it's 8, and then the variable that we've just defined, so cell size. That hasn't had a visible effect, which is what we wanted. Okay, and then we can use the cell size in the rows as well, so we can use the same method, repeat, but we're repeating 4 of them with the var cell size. Okay, so they're still square, which is good. Then our logo prism can, instead of, well, it can span full. It's 2, but I think, yeah, maybe we just, if we try putting the height on here of var, sorry, calculate the cell size, and it takes up 2. So it'd be var cell size times 2. Okay, so that has actually sized it to 2. We want it to start on 3 then? Yeah, okay. So if I take off the border, we have our kind of prism, the image set to the height now of 2 cells. So that's looking like it's in the correct position, and the yeah, everything else looks about right. I mean, the background seems to be too dark as well on our version. So just adjust the background by increasing the opacity on the canvas. Still not done it. I think oh, there we are. Okay, reasonably happy with that for mobile. Going to need to make some adjustments to the triangle position now on full size, desktop size, because it's no longer in the right place. We're also using, yeah, I guess the sizing of the cells needs to be set so that the position of that logo is in the right place, because the moment it's setting it to cell size, and the cell size is based off of there being 8. It's based off of the full width. So yeah, this needs to become dynamic so we can put a media query on the cell size. So what I'll do is create a new file for vercel.css. Define variables on main. So if I just did like main, put that in like that. And then in here, we want to import that CSS. Let's delete these. Okay, see if it still works on mobile. Yeah. So the size of the cell will need a media query. Because our grid has a max width of 1080, we'll need to factor that in. So here we're just saying, yeah, it's this size, but when it's greater than that, it's going to be the max value of 1080 or the padding, which is so that, and then we've got, do we have 12? I can't remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so we've got 12 columns. So now the cell size is hopefully set up to be correct for the larger view width. So our columns can be basically the same as this, but 12 of them. Grid calls repeat 12 our cell size. Oh. I see. I mean, it should be right. The rows will be what we had before. Except we're just repeating 8 of the cell size. Oh, I've truly buggered it now. Let's just hard code a value, check if that's actually looking correct. Yeah, so 98 pixels, and then if we put 98 pixels in here to see if that. So something's pushing this sizing out. these were determining the size of the grid, but if I comment these out, I think because we're setting the cell size explicitly, that size is working now. So I'll try and get the prism centered or positioned properly on the larger size. So if I just put say a small, and then do the too high again, but this I'm just going to hard code 98 for now. And then we're not starting it on row start 3 anymore. We want to start it on row start, say 8. Put the border back on it. Oh no, it's not row start 8, is it? It's row start, say 5 or 6. 6, there we are. I don't know why it's going out. It's going out too far. It's like the... Oh, that's probably not going to be there. Looks like we've got too many columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yes, there are 12. Just for some reason, the content's no longer filling it. Let's go to here and just put a dash border on some things and see what's happening. Because the size of those cells must be too big, because this has a max width, but that 98 value that I hard coded is too much. So I'm going to put this in and just try a different value. I'm going to take off the grid max width for now. Going to put back in the variable cell size on the rows and the columns. And then take off width full. Okay. That's looking more right. So I increase the size of this, which is what we want to be dynamic. Yeah. Our prism needs the cell size times 2 is still correct. Yeah. Okay, so that's looking more right. The calculation here just needs to work basically, because we have 12 columns. That's too big, but we need to factor in the max width. So this is why I thought the max of 1080 pixels. Maybe I didn't put pixels in before. Oh no, it's not. It's still growing too much. So why is that happening? It should be min, that's why. Oh, the joys of CSS. Yeah. Okay, so that looks like it's in the right place, at least size-wise. So if we do, I mean, this, yeah, we need to have the 8 for the smaller size, and then that's positioned properly. The borders, so the thing I commented out here, actually just putting those in is okay. I'll put the border brightness in the variable back up again to see how they're looking. So that's worked okay. I'm not sure what this top section is. Oh, that's the padding on the background. So we had a 7% or something padding on our background container that is here, but we could potentially just do the variable of cell size. I'll just push that down 1. Okay, let's turn off the border. Knock the opacity back to 0.1. Take off the border from the prism logo thingy. There seems to be too much gap on that heading. I feel like this is something's going to break at some point. Yeah, so at that point, it's no longer working. And here the background's now not quite right for some reason. There seems to be a mix of like using small and medium breakpoints. See where medium's been used. So the grid changes to 12 columns at medium, but if I put that to small, see where else medium's been used. I'll just switch these. I might do a find and replace on medium, just swap it for small for now, just so that there's a consistent breakpoint. There's something a little bit funky happening this size here, that's still too large. Switches to small, but I think the size of this heading bit's taking up. This is taking up too much room. All right, what I'm going to do is swap small for medium. Yeah, okay. Now there's only one breakpoint being used, so, and I think medium is the 768 that we have for adjusting these the cell size, so that just needs to match up. All right, well, good news, the mobile bit is looking pretty close. Yeah, there's the colors. They got different colors for the gradient, but I don't think I'm going to bother changing those. But yeah, there just need to be a conditional class on that. All right, sweet. That was a bit tricky, but got there in the end. The sorted out the mobile. So the button needs an icon and transparent border color. So on the variants, we've got our light button and our dark button, and it's the dark button that should have the border. So it's got a kind of a shadow. So if we put a shadow, and then we can say, what do we want? We want, I think we want 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 1 pixel. And if I just do white, yeah, so that's given a solid border, but what we'll have is an RGBA color. Still seems to have a border color on it. Oh, it's probably because that's on it. Yeah, okay, so then there's shadow. Can't see that shadow. I wonder if it's because it's got some sort of border covering it. Can't see box shadow here at all. Maybe I have to find that incorrectly. Yeah, okay. All right, so that's actually what we want. We want a faint shadow, about 20% opacity around that border, around that button, because then we get to see the lines behind it. So I just need to get this into Tailwind class. So yeah, it looks like I was along the right path. I just didn't use underline gaps in here. So this should be shadow like this. It doesn't have commas. That's a good spot if you saw that before me. All right, nice. So those are both done. Now the icon for that start deploying button. In fact, I would probably just, it's better performance-wise if you actually just load, and if something like this can just be exported as an SVG and then loaded into the image itself. Means that it's not part of the JavaScript bundle. So let's scrap that, and then on our button, here, let's put an image in. Do the button triangle, import that. Okay. Now we'll want to put a gap on our button across all. We could say gap x2, something like that. Quite often there's less padding on the side of the icon than there is on the side of the text, and I think we could stick a negative margin on the icon in this case, just because we're only using one icon, just to pull that over to the left a little bit. Yeah. Don't think we need quite as much horizontal padding. I currently have 5, but we also have a width on those buttons so that they're the same size. So yeah, this works. I think the gap is potentially too small though. Let's close that. Font sizes, this has become really small, so something's gone a little haywire in here. Oh yeah. All right. Okay, I think that kind of concludes this top section. It's responsive. There's too much padding on that top section though, when we get to like this, the colors offset. So there's work to be done there. That could take a little bit longer, so I'm not going to do that right now unless I can see a kind of simple fix for the background. It does have a height on it. I wonder if it's taking the height off. What happens if I put that back to size full? Yeah, maybe just, that's actually pretty close. Yeah. And then the background there should be kind of slightly more padding on the smaller one to push it down a little further. So like we could say the medium has padding top cell size and the regular or the mobile has calc cell size times 2. So let's knock that down. Okay, cool. And that, yeah, sort of wraps up this part of it. I'm going to continue in another video the section down here. It's just, this has gotten too long for one guy. Okay, so to finish then, I'm going to run through the code, check if I can see any immediate kind of room for improvement. So we've got the main section here. Now this section could actually be marked up as a header. It is the main header. So that's the grid itself. That pretty much contains everything. Padding 4 is the equivalent of 16 pixels, so 32 pixels either side, and then in here we're using that to determine the cell size, because this is width full. It's going to be full view width basically. The background is positioned absolute within that. It's full size, so we don't need that medium one. We do need the overflow hidden because it's pushing content down using the top padding. The canvas, so yeah, I did note that the uniform's been set every frame, the width is updated. So this is kind of a little bit unperformant, and what we may want to do is we could put a use deferred value on the width, and then using a Mantine hook, then we could use debounce value, then we could debounce the width change, say every half a second, so that it won't run this use effect so rapidly. So that would be an area for improvement there. Also WebGL2 could be used. I think it's defaulting to 1. This is our black gradient overlay. That is fine. This is the colored overlay. So this one it would have slight adjustments for mobile. So the color, the positioning of it's slightly different. Color stops. Gradient offsetting colors. This again may have slight adjustment for mobile. That's the kind of black gradient there. So if I take that off, we see that. The lines, they're just scaling based on whether it's mobile or not, so that they kind of come out wider. The positioning of them is not quite right either, so that would need a little bit of work. Improve positioning for mobile. The grid blocks, these, they don't really need an aspect on them. If I change it on the mid-size grid, if I take off the aspect, so we don't see a change because we've defined the aspect ratio by explicitly setting the column size, or the column width, and the row height as being that cell size value. So yeah, we can take off the aspect square now. We could, what else could we do? Oh yeah, we could mark up these as having that area hidden true. So these are not interactive elements. Same with all of the background, really. And the cross. The main heading, I think this is, yeah, it's pretty good. It's resizing nicely. It's moving its position within the grid. Obviously the button has just been made solely for the purposes of this top section. So realistically, the button component would probably be more advanced and have perhaps a size class, the ability to handle href, as well as just on click. Yeah, I'm not even passing through an on click or anything here, so this is just solely display at the moment. And yeah, that wraps it up. I think we're good to end this one here. Appreciate your viewing, and hopefully you kind of gain something from coding along. Yeah, have a good day. Peace.